Series is dedicated to exploring, illuminating, warning about, and urging corrective action be taken concerning the unrestricted warfare that the Chinese Communist Party has engaged in against the United States since the early 1990s. It takes many forms. We've done something on the order of, I think, over the years, some 230 of these webinars at this point, each of them seeking to address the myriad lines of attack that the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, has utilized for an unmistakable and, in fact, declared purpose: destroying the United States of America. One of the most pernicious and effective of all of those lines of attack, arguably, is what the Chinese Communist Party has called elite capture, by which they simply mean that they have made it their business to seek to compromise, to enlist in one form or another, to suborn, in fact, in some cases, to actually utilize leaders in the United States, in most, if not all, of our sectors, for their purpose of destroying this country. So we've talked over the years about what that looks like, very prominently with respect to Wall Street and what so-called masters of the universe there have been doing to transfer literally trillions of dollars from American investors in pension funds, mutual funds, assorted other investment vehicles to China, often investing them directly in companies controlled directly or indirectly, certainly, by the Chinese Communist Party, in some cases directly supporting, whether it's publicly established or clandestinely, the People's Liberation Army in acquiring the means by which to wage war against our country and its people. The tech titans have similarly fallen in line and worked with the Chinese communists. Similarly, the people in our educational system, our media, the capital markets subset of venture capital, which is seen fit to transfer large quantities, as has the tech sector, of very, very dangerous intellectual property in the wrong hands to the Chinese Communist Party. But arguably one of the most troubling of all of these elite capture operations is one that has been noted for some time, but has just been put in very sharp relief by an intrepid investigative reporter by the name of Natalie Winters, associated with one of our co-founders of the Committee on the Present Danger of China, Steve Bannon, and his War Room program. And Natalie, in a Substack post earlier this week in social media and on Steve's show, put up in lights the fact that senior retired U.S. military officers, including people who've held the most senior positions in our military, members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Vice Chiefs of Staff, combatant commanders and other top personnel have been among those that the Chinese have brought into influence operations run, as they generally are, by intelligence services, as well as operations like the United Front. We're going to play first a clip of Natalie describing all of this, her new revelations being particularly in the form of exactly who has been doing this kind of collaborative work with the Chinese Communists, front organizations of various kinds, and to what effect. This is going to be bracing, so I encourage you to strap in, because Natalie and Steve mince no words about the danger that they associate with this activity and the odiousness of it, especially from senior military personnel. Let's go to the videotape of Natalie Winters on War Room earlier this week.
They were taking them on trips overseas, and you could see after they came back, they were shilling Chinese propaganda, plain and simple. While this same group, but in conjunction with a group called CAIFC, that's the China Association for International Friendly Contact, which is even more explicitly part of China's military apparatus. It's part of basically the PLA's political warfare department. They do joint, espionage and intel collecting, but also from a military standpoint, getting people to push info ops on the American people. And they were running basically the same exact program, not just with idiot schmuck journalists, but with former chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, vice chairmen, former COCOM commanders, commanders of Pacific Command, chief of naval operations. They were basically taking these people over as a program called the Sanya Dialogue, the Sanya Initiative. It started in 2008. They were meeting with the highest levels in American government too. You have pictures of them with Hillary Clinton. A lot of the people who were involved. So again, these are not like military commentators. These are people who literally ran the theaters of war that the Chinese Communist Party wants to understand what our, COA, our course of action is, were anything to break out. These are the people who are literally interacting with a spy front that has been caught up in the same schemes where they are literally buying this information off of people, and these people literally later go to jail. But this is something that, like I was saying, has gone on for nearly 2 decades. They've even gotten up to the U.S. Naval Academy. We've had some of the leaders of the CMC up and around there talking with people. But Steve, it's important. There's 2 parts to the story. One is the public facing stuff, right, where they do the mill-to-mill exchanges and it's all happy, which I would argue there's no such thing as happy collaboration with the Chinese. But then there's the darker secret side to this, which is that these names weren't published, and these are people, including former vice chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Bill Owens, will make him famous, who literally became a consultant for Huawei after participating in this, helped try to bid for contracts and help them gain a foothold in America to get their product here. Literally was writing op-eds called "America Must Start Treating China as a Friend." That's your former vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and there are about 24 people who were all a part of this at the highest levels of the U.S. military. These names were not ever publicized, right? These are from brochures, Chinese language brochures, buried in pages that we were never supposed to find, that I will say, Steve, after we've made QSF really famous, now their website doesn't really work anymore. It's interesting how that works. But in this case, here are the people that we want to make famous. That's General Peter Pace, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral William Owens, the former vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General John Abizade, former commander of U.S. CENTCOM, General Raymond Odierno, former Army Chief of Staff, Admiral Jonathan Greener, former Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Timothy Keating, former commander of U.S. Pacific Command, General Ronald Fogelman, former Air Force Chief of Staff, General Dennis Reamer, former Army Chief of Staff, Admiral Joseph Kerr, former commander of U.S. Pacific Command, General John Keane, yes, that's Jack Keane of Fox News, so take that, former Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, General Walter Sharp, former commander of U.S. Forces Korea, General Charles Jacoby, former commander of U.S. Northern Command.
This is you are literally going through a who's who of some of the most respected military, both Navy, Army, Marine Corps, and I think some Air Force. Once again, just give the audience, what have these folks done? And of course, they haven't advertised, it's all in Chinese language. What have they done to compromise the security of the United States of America?
They have worked hand in glove, forming a secret back channel that makes Mark Milley look like child's play with a group, the CAIFC and QSEF. That's the Pay for Play Trip group. CAIFC is literally a political warfare branch of the People's Liberation Army that plays, according to the U.S. government, dual roles of intelligence collection and conducting propaganda and perception management campaigns. After meeting with the PRC, obviously they have these back channels. God knows what they shared with the Chinese Communist Party. Some people explicitly ended up on their payroll lobbying for Chinese Communist Party owned companies, shilling them in the press. But these are people who for years have met secretly with Chinese Communist Party, the highest levels of their military officials. The Chinese Communist Party, the way they do their intel collection, the way they work with espionage and propaganda, you cannot sit in a room with them without being compromised. Full stop. End of sentence, end of story. And these people who spent their entire careers learning how political warfare works by the Chinese Communist Party, it is literally like they are sitting there, Steve, like prostitutes, begging for cash from the Chinese Communist Party, saying, hey, what do you want to know about what our plan is in some theater of warfare? Oh, let me guess, probably around Taiwan. It's disgusting. They helped connect them to government officials, and they're literally talking about mill-to-mill exchanges with the Chinese Communist Party. Here's the difference. In one room, on one side, you have Chinese spies. On the other side, you have greedy, lustful for capital and trying to feel important former American generals who just want to sell out, sabotage the United States of America for some consulting fees for Huawei. That's not a fair match. Obviously, it's mismatched motives. And it's absolutely disgusting. These people need to be shamed into oblivion.
Well, there you have it, folks. One woman's assessment of it, but I think it's fair to say that there are a few, certainly in the journalistic role, that understand better the nature of the Chinese Communist Party and its use of, well, I think what she called useful idiots, as well as people who are prepared to be bought. I know some of these general officers personally, have been proud to be associated with them, in fact, celebrated them. And it's deeply troubling that they have been involved with this kind of activity, as is the case with others like Vice Admiral Owens, who actually went on the payroll with a Chinese Communist Party front company that is known for its involvement, both in, yes, telecommunications, but in espionage on behalf of the Chinese. This is a moment when we wanted to take stock of what the implications of this kind of penetration of the senior ranks of the United States military means. And we're very pleased to have, as we often do in these programs, sometimes because of where they live, the necessities of doing it via videotape rather than live. But we're going to start with a very, very important member of this committee. His name is Captain James Fennell, United States Navy retired. You're actually going to hear about him from our next presenter, but we wanted to take stock with him first of what he makes of all of this as an intelligence specialist and very accomplished practitioner. And he gave us an interview earlier in the week for our program, Securing America. And with his permission, we've edited a portion of it for the purposes of responding to what Natalie Winters has exposed here, and more broadly, helping us understand how this fits into the larger purposes of the Chinese Communist Party and the intensified danger that results from it for our country. Let's go to the video with Captain James Fennell now.
I think Natalie's recent Substack article and the things that she's put out on X are probably her best work in her career. Because what it is finally exposing things that many of us have known that worked in the China area inside the Pentagon. And we're concerned about this and talking about it. But this has really drawn a lot of attention to it. We raised this issue in our book, Embracing Communist China, America's Greatest Strategic Failure. We have sections on the Sanya Initiative and Admiral Owens, who was leading that, the former vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But what Natalie's done is really presented it in a fine way that gives a lot of names, and it makes the connection to these Chinese Communist Party intelligence apparatuses. And I know that the admirals and generals that went on these trips were well aware of probably the association with the Chinese intelligence. But that is the real issue. These are not stupid men or stupid people. They know what was going on, but it was part of their belief system that the United States must engage with the China, the PRC, the People's Republic of China, because they were on the rise. And there was this belief inside the Pentagon, like over at Foggy Bottom with the State Department, that America was in decline. We bought into the Chinese narrative. We did that for many, many reasons, but the bottom line is we have an elite class in our country, the credentialed class as some call them, but in terms of the military, at the 3- and 4-star level, there are most of them at that time period, and this Sanya Initiative kicked off in 2008, but there was negotiations before that. And this idea that we could have this track 2 dialogue, this, track 1 is official to official, government to government official communications. And they created track 1.5 and 2.0, which is this kind of, we'll get retired former officers, the senior ones get paid the most, get the most, first class tickets over to China, get wined and dined at 5-star hotels, and get to meet the highest echelons of the Chinese Communist Party. So part of it will be sold as what we were doing, our intelligence work for the U.S. government. That's how some will support that. Others will say, we're just over there to prevent things getting out of control, and we want to engage so that we don't have a thermonuclear war, the Graham Allison Thucydides trap argument. But at the base of it all is this idea that we have to manage this relationship because it's so important, and therefore we must continue to talk to them. And these people, when they were in uniform on active duty, they were having that same kind of approach, and they were influencing. So in 2008 and 9, when the Sanya Initiative was going over with Admiral Owens to China, to Beijing, to be wined and dined, I'm aboard the USS Blue Ridge with the US 7th Fleet. And guess what we're hearing coming from those meetings? We're getting those reports that are going to the PACOM commander, the Pacific Fleet commander, filtering down to the 7th Fleet commander, about what's going on and what we can do and how we can engage. So it's influencing generations of continuing officers to have this view towards China. And that's what they were selling to Beijing, which was to say, we can help manage this relationship to ensure that it doesn't spiral out of control. But you didn't have the opposite view, which was to say, okay, you've had these engagements. What is the proof that they've resulted in benefit to our national security? Well, I can tell you, because Natalie lists, they talked about nuclear proliferation and nuclear weapons. Well, guess what happened on July 6th, a month ago today? China launched a submarine-launched ballistic missile from the South China Sea, and it flew 7,500 kilometers into the South Pacific, doing a test launch of a nuclear missile that's designed to blow up over and hit the United States of America. That's what that missile's for, and those Jin-class SSBNs, ballistic missile submarines, are for. So things haven't gotten better, they've gotten worse. So any way you measure it, this is a fail on our national security structure. 1947, we had the National Security Act to protect us from being surprised again. And now here we are 80 years later, and we have our own senior flag and general officers thinking that they can set their own foreign policy for the United States of America by engaging with Chinese Communist Party that's vowed to destroy us. So there's only one solution to this. Congress should get off its butt and pass a law that says if you're a retired officer, you are forbidden to go to China, and you're forbidden from meeting with senior Chinese, any Chinese Communist Party officials or their front groups. We could do that, and that would cut off the gravy train from all these 4-stars that get on these boards and make, 6-7-figure salaries after they retire, because they are spreading their career information. 40 years usually, 45 years in some cases. They'll take that wealth of knowledge and provide it not only to the 5 big primes, but they're now providing it to our adversaries, and they're learning from it. The Chinese are learning from it, and they're going to use it against us. And it's a travesty. It's a travesty, and these people should be named out, which she's done. So thank you, Natalie, for doing that. But it needs to be followed up with action to prevent this from happening.
Captain Fennell, thank you for that characteristically clear, unvarnished, and I believe absolutely right on characterization of the problem. These old friends of China are making it a more formidable adversary to the United States. That may not be their intention. I'm certain that at fast, each of them would aver that it is not, but it is the practical effect. I think it's also important to note, and we'll get into this, I think, in more detail with some of our other contributors, that this elite capture is emboldening the Chinese Communist Party to believe that they are going to have their way with us, either through unrestricted subversion, perhaps, or if necessary, as they see it, through violent means. It's incalculable what additional confidence might be imparted in those respects by having top commanders of the United States military, albeit retired, at their beck and call. And this is what we're going to hear more about from our next presenter, another very faithful contributor to these webinars, as well as to the work of the committee more generally. His name is Colonel Grant Newsham, United States Marine Corps, retired. He has the distinction of having also served as a foreign service officer in the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo. He's been a businessman for many years in East Asia. He is the author of a best-selling book entitled When China Attacks, a Warning to America. It's a nice companion piece to the one that Captain Fennell and Dr. Bradley Thayer did that was mentioned in the earlier presentation, Embracing Communist China, America's Greatest Strategic Failure. I think both of these have as very much a common denominator, warnings against this kind of behavior on the part of American elites. Let's go to the videotape that Colonel Newsham was kind enough to make available to us earlier this morning because it could not be with us live.
This problem has been going on for a long time, and it's well known, actually. The recent reporting about the Sanya Initiative, that sort of fun in the sun deal for retired American flag officers and very senior officials, that was well known from the beginning, and there were people raising the alarm saying this is insane to go put yourself in a position where Chinese intelligence has open access to you. And the guys who went, none of them would listen. And it's an American conceit that everybody's going to like them. They're going to be the one who can fix all problems. And also that if we can just talk to people, have them get to know us, they will like us, we can work out any problems at all. It's just the American trait. Sometimes people just can't keep their mouth shut. And when there's a sort of a first class ticket and 5-star hotels, free accommodation and a nice honorarium, it's even harder for a certain type of American to keep their mouth shut. And we're of course talking about military officers, the most, flag officers, admirals and generals. And that was the problem. Of course, there's the list that's just come out of guys who went and gals who went to China for this thing. And I say this is not unknown, and it's in my book as well. And I say it got a lot of coverage at the time, and every once in a while it would get some light shown on it. But the one name that does come up, of course, is this Admiral Owens, former Vice Chief of Staff, Joint Chief of Staff. And he comes pretty darn close to meeting the dictionary definition of treason, and aiding and abetting America's enemies, and he has, by all accounts, profited handsomely from this. The others, they can make a case they're just useful idiots and, never hurts to talk. War wars, or jaws better than war. That sort of misinterpreted statement by Winston Churchill. But it's worth remembering the context in which this happened. And this was back in an era when you could not even say China was an adversary. And American flag officers were practically in a conga line to get to go visit in China, get to accommodate China as well. I'll just cite a few examples. Around 2008, the Commandant of the Marine Corps went to China, visited their Marine Corps, gave them a sort of a boys master your profession sort of pep talk, and they took him to heart. And now they are a solid Marine Corps. You had in 2015, the deputy commander at Marfor Pac went and visited China's Eastern Theater Command, and this was considered a great success by many people. It was actually arranged by an officer in the G5 at Marfor Pac of Chinese origins who had always insisted that China's rise was peaceful. China was not a threat, but this was considered a success. You recall what happened to people who did mention that China was out for a war, was getting ready for one, how they were savage. There was one naval officer in particular who just said China's getting ready for a short, sharp war. He was a prominent intelligence officer, and he was just attacked fiercely, forced to retire. And at the same time, when he made those statements, and it became a thing, you had a general named Ray Odierno, I think it was Army Chief of Staff, who was on that list of Sanya visitors. He was in China at the time. He was asked, is China getting ready for a war? He says, not that I can see. I remember another instance around 2012 when the Japanese army was in visiting Hawaii, and the commander U.S. Army Pacific was hosting a meeting, and the Japanese gave a presentation about the China threat. And they also pointed out, we've lived by these people for 2,000 years. We might know something. And the commander belittled them, dismissed them with a yeah. And what do you guys know? And my life in 25 years in Japan, I've seen the Japanese furious twice. That was one of them. But that was the mindset. And back to that the intelligence officer who was cashiered for saying the obvious, China's getting ready for a fight. That was Captain Jim Fennell. The Obama White House hated him, wanted his head. They demanded it. Harry Harris, the commander at PACOM, gladly accommodated them. And China was laughing all the way to the bank. And here we were stuck with this idea, China's not an enemy. If we only get to know them, understand their intentions, though a moron could have figured out what their intentions were. They kept telling us that we would have understood the threat, and done something about it. You might say, well, what's the big deal? Never hurts to talk. Well, there's a certain, it's true as far as it goes, but not when the guy across the table has made it clear that he intends to destroy you. That is why he's building his military as well. But also, that sort of thinking permeates through the U.S. military. And there's a sense that, maybe there's something with China, but we don't know for sure. It's not really a threat. And it keeps you from focusing on the mission and getting ready. And there's always doubt that you're going to face these people as a threat. Another good example is there was Admiral Keating, who was the commander of PACOM around 2009 or so. He was asked, when he was visiting China, he was asked, what's the deal with China getting aircraft carriers? Do you mind? And he says, no, I don't see anything wrong with it, and I'll help them as much as I can. Admiral Keating's name is on the list of visitors to Sanya. So it was this sort of muddled thinking that kept us from recognizing the threat, focusing on it, and getting ready to do something about it. And Sanya is just one example of a much broader problem. It's, of course, better these days, where there is far more of a recognition than there ever was. But there still seems to be a return to engagement. And you're seeing it from PACOM and Pentagon. If only we can talk to the Chinese, if only they'd tell us what their intentions are. Well, if Jim Lilly was around, he'd have told you they telegraphed their punches, and they've been telling us this. Now, there have, of course, been people who've been very good on this. There was Captain James Fennell that I mentioned. General John Tulin was good. General Gregson was good. Those are Marine generals. There was Admiral Robert Willard, who 2010's Lieutenant General Tom Conant, the deputy at PACOM. These guys understood the Chinese, and the Chinese hated them as a result. But too many of unfortunately, the ruling class then were guys who just, as I said, couldn't keep their mouths shut, and the allure of going to China, saying you'd been there, having names in your Rolodex, was just too much, and we took our eye off the ball and lost focus. There are many of officers that I have now that I didn't cite who were very good on this, but they were not well received. And so it's nice to see this getting attention again, that Natalie Winters has done some good work. And, hopefully we've learned our lessons, but sometimes, we Americans just can't help keep their mouths shut and just have to talk. But at the same time, we know better. We have no excuses. And as for the people who went to Sanya, I would just like one of them to say, maybe I shouldn't have. Just one. I'm not holding my breath for that, but remember those names that I said of the people who did sound the alarm and were very badly treated. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Colonel. As always, this is important corporate memory as well as, validation of the insights of a man who did, put his career on the line to speak truth to power. That would be Captain James Fennell, as you have done yourself, sir, in your own career. We're going to turn finally to a live contributor, I'm very pleased to say, live and with us for the purpose. That would be the chairman of our Committee on the Present Danger of China, Brian Travis Kennedy. Brian has been working in public policy for decades. Many of those years spent running one of the most prominent think tanks, as they're called, in the United States, the Claremont Institute. These days he is the president of the American Strategy Group and a very active participant, of course, in this committee and its work as its founding chairman. He is the author of China's War Within the United States. He's a very impactful essayist in myriad publications. And we deeply and always appreciate his contributions to these programs, as well as his leadership more generally. And Brian, we've asked you to come, as you often do, as sort of the cleanup batter to help us understand what the most important takeaways are from what we've heard and how this fits into the larger challenge that we face from the Chinese Communist Party, and to Colonel Newsham's closing point, and really that of Captain Fennell as well, what we need to do about this phenomenon. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Frank. I am live, obviously. The other folks we had on were live too, but they sometimes they live in time zones that, as you say, are not convenient. Yesterday, I was actually giving a lecture to the Claremont Institute's Lincoln Fellows program. I will say Natalie Winters, a couple of years ago, was a Lincoln Fellow of the Claremont Institute. And I was giving a lecture invoking your name several times about both the threat from communist China and the threat from Islam in the United States. And I'm not sure if your ears were burning, but I was praising you widely. This work that Natalie's done, I think, is extremely important. Important in part because the more light we can shed on this, the better. When it comes to generals, we often think of the generals as the grown-ups in the room. How many Americans go to bed at night believing that there are generals in Washington, both active duty and retired, who know how the world works, are deeply concerned about, the threat from our enemies abroad, and are doing something about it to make sure that the American people can sleep well at night? I would venture to say it is the vast majority of the American people believe that. the generals, as I say, are the so-called adults in the room who are going to make sure, no matter who the president is, that we're going to remain safe. What Natalie's exposed is that we have a generation today of flag officers who are looking at American society more broadly and seeing that America itself doesn't see China as a threat. Wall Street doesn't see China as a threat. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which should be concerned about the economic well-being of the American people, doesn't see China as a threat. They're all making money from communist China, and so the generals, retired, as Natalie's exposed here, they're going to cash in too. Why wouldn't they? If every other captain of industry is cashing in, why shouldn't we, the retired generals who have served so long and so otherwise nobly for the country, why shouldn't we cash in as well? And what Natalie, I think, is showing here is there's something either actually treasonous or borderline treasonous about some of this behavior. You and I both know, Frank, that a lot of the generals have, let's assume for a moment that the vast majority of our generals, and this is not an obvious assumption, they're patriotic Americans who love their country, who want to do good. Unfortunately, today, we have a substantial number who have, I would argue, a very bad strategic education and do not believe in the kind of common sense realism that would be required to build a military that would be capable of defending the United States. Where are the generals, both active and retired, going before Congress and explaining the state of our military? What will be required to defend these United States against all enemies abroad? You don't see that. You don't see that. I mean, everybody is when they're paraded before Congress, quite often it's to ask for more money for sure, but it's also to reinforce this notion that the United States is all powerful, that we can do anything, anywhere, anytime, and that all the money that we're spending is both necessary, good, and effective. When in fact our military has not built the kind of it's not constructed the kind of military that would be required to defend the United States against communist China. And so once you craft a military and make recommendations to the president, the commander-in-chief, about what kind of military we have, and that military is not designed to make war on communist China, it becomes, as Secretary Rumsfeld would often point out, a self-fulfilling prophecy. You don't have the kind of military you need, and so therefore you don't fight that kind of war. We don't have a military today to challenge adequately communist China. Now, I say that as someone who, we don't want to go to war with communist China, but we certainly want to deter communist China from doing things that are not in America's interests. But we have a nuclear arsenal, which I think one could argue is inadequate simply by the virtue of the fact that it's not been tested, it's not been modernized adequately, and it may not match the current threat and threats that the United States has today. So you get a nuclear arsenal that's inadequate. You get a navy which is not quite big enough. You get an air force that can certainly drop bombs, but you may not have quite enough ordnance. And so all of a sudden, because you can't take war to communist China itself, and again, let me quickly add, no one wants to fight a land war in Asia, but I would humbly suggest that communist China will not take the United States seriously if we don't construct a military capable of bringing war to communist China. The same way the Soviet Union was not going to take the United States seriously until we were prepared to take war to the Soviet Union. However undesirable all these things are, and however much we don't want to fight wars, we want to deter wars. And you're going to get deterrence when the other side believes that you can make war upon them. Again, we don't want to build that kind of a military to actually engage in war unless we absolutely have to. These generals, though, throughout their careers, constructed, as it were, both a strategy and a military, and were part of a system that did not believe in taking on communist China. So it would not be surprising that when they're retired, they engage in the kind of private diplomacy, let's just call it, that's the most charitable explanation one could give. They engage in private diplomacy, which is not designed to, let's just say, persuade communist China that war with the United States would be a bad idea, but private diplomacy that seeks to expand communist China's influence here in the United States. And that's why some of our panelists today say this is either treason or borderline treason. And it certainly looks that way. The worst part, it seems to me, or one of the really failings of this whole thing, is that we know the Chinese are masters of corruption. And so you're a general, you go over there, you sit and you have meetings immediately because you're retired, immediately because you're getting paid, immediately because there are so many angles of attack upon you. Everything you will say after that visit to communist China will be suspect. Were you compromised? What do they throw at you when you go to communist China and you're a person of some import? They'll throw women at you, compromise you with sex. I mean, this is as old as, time immemorial. They'll throw money at you. They'll throw influence at you. When the generals were there, did they bring their own electronics? Did they leave with anything from communist China? Were they given anything? You notice when President Trump just visited China a few months ago, that they didn't bring their electronics with them off Air Force One, and everything that they received from communist China, they threw in a box before they boarded Air Force One in their trip back to the United States. Now, why did they do that? Because the Chinese are masters at compromising your electronics, which mostly they produce, but they were able to compromise those electronics and get into all your secure data. Were the generals that strict with their own security when they went over there? Were they going over there with the blessing of the U.S. government? My guess is the answer is no. I'm sure they do have to alert someone to their activities, especially if they still have security clearances. But overall, this was not something that was well thought through, in my opinion. Or it is something which has been thought through, and someone in our government thinks that's okay. We have the experience, as we know, of the lack of counterintelligence in this country. The Chinese threat is so big, we quit taking it seriously in so many important ways. By not seriously meaning because the magnitude of what the Chinese do in this country is so great, we can't construct or we haven't constructed anyway, a counterintelligence capability that would make sure that they couldn't corrupt either a general here or someone in the business community or Wall Street or the U.S. government itself or in the media. Natalie points out in one of her other writings on this same theme how many U.S. journalists were given money by communist China to write anti-Trump articles, on a regular basis. The Chinese, as we've highlighted here on quite literally hundreds of occasions, they spend $20 billion in intelligence and influence operations in the United States. That's not counting all their business dealings. That's not counting $45 billion that they spend on their college students going to American universities. Just in what we think of as intelligence and influence operations of the kind that Natalie's describing, they spend $20 billion, we believe. Well, that's a lot of money thrown at a pretty select group of people. You throw that much money into the system, you're going to get a fair number of people who will toe the Communist Party line. And they'll do it in very artful ways that make it look like it's for the good of the United States, when in fact, the Chinese are pretty explicit. It's for the good of the Chinese Communist Party. And so I would say in conclusion, Frank, that more Natalie Winters more of the time. I think her work has been fabulous. This is a very important theme that she's grabbed onto, and one that we should be taking very seriously. Our elites have been captured by communist China. They've also, they've been captured in ways that are, sometimes even if they're not receiving money from communist China or influence or something else, they've been captured intellectually. That somehow our two worlds have to work together as one in order to have peace and prosperity for the world, when in fact our freedom is being put at risk with communist China. Our economy is not as prosperous as it should be. We don't have anything today to account for the damage that they did to the country during COVID. We don't have anything to account for their theft of American intellectual property. And we can see with our own two eyes the building of a military by communist China that has one primary focus, and that is the destruction of the United States. We need to do everything in our power to make sure the American people understand that. And that, of course, is the work of the Committee on the Present Danger China. And thank you, Frank, for your leadership in all that we do.
Well, back at you, Brian Kennedy. Thank you for yours. And there's a number of points that I wanted to pick up on in response to what you've said, and we can do a little back and forth with you. I did think that I might, though, take a minute to tell a story that I don't believe I've ever told in public before. Back in 1983, I had the privilege of being tapped by a longtime colleague of mine, Richard Pearl, who was then an Assistant Secretary of Defense, to become one of his deputies in the office of the Secretary of Defense. And as it happened, I arrived in August, right about now, and everybody in the food chain, basically between me and the Secretary of Defense on the policy side of the house, was on vacation. So it fell to me, all of, I think, 3 days on the job, to come and make a presentation to a gathering of senior military, both civilian and uniformed, from all over the Pentagon, none of whom was on vacation, it turns out. And we were there to discuss something that they were white hot about. The Secretary of Defense, Caspar Weinberger, had not unreasonably arrived at the conclusion that at the time the Soviet Union was violating all of its arms control obligations, in particular those governing our strategic forces and theirs. And he decided that since they were doing it, well, by gum, he was going to direct that we start violating those limitations that have been institutionalized in the SALT arms control agreements, as I recall at the time. And the uniformed military, and for that matter, their civilian counterparts, the various service secretaries and other, folks in the Pentagon, wanted no part of having the latitude to actually expand the number of nuclear forces. Jim Fennell commented on the sort of appalling state of those deterrent forces these days. But at the time, Ronald Reagan was set on, and indeed had embarked upon, refurbishing the entire arsenal. But to a person, those in that meeting wanted to stay within the limitations of a treaty that the Soviets had violated, and were insistent that the capabilities that we had under those limitations were exactly the ones we needed, and that anything above and beyond that to sort of respond to Soviet violations would be not only not needed, but really a waste of money. And I tell that story simply because it's a manifestation of something that I think is operating here to some extent, that has resulted, as each of our presenters have pointed out, with a military that is sufficiently, inadequate to the job of deterring not just the Chinese Communist Party, but the successors to the Soviet Union and its arsenal in Russia, who are now partnered up against us, sharing unmistakably a common ambition to destroy this country. And that doesn't even take into account, the North Koreans and the Iranians and others who would love to see that come about and will be playing a role that's also harmful to us if they can. The point is that I think, as you said in as many words, Brian, we have not been pursuing, at least in terms of the uniformed military, as one might expect we would, a policy that my old boss Ronald Reagan called peace through strength. We've been, even on his watch, told that no, we don't need that, or we can do without, or we shouldn't have it, or the other side might respond badly if we, put into place certain capabilities. All of which is to say that the kind of threat deflation that Jim Finnell had campaigned against, throughout his time in uniform, and certainly has since he left the Navy, the kind of posture that Colonel Newsham has written about, that's inviting a Chinese attack, as he says in his title, when China attacks, not if, because in part we've set conditions that prompt them to believe that they can do so, if not with complete impunity, certainly on acceptable terms. So this brings us sort of to the larger point that I just wanted to come back to you on, Brian Kennedy. We published a book a couple of years ago now entitled The Indictment. And it's about, the subtitle is Prosecuting the Chinese Communist Party and Friends for Crimes Against America, China, and the World. It was almost entirely a product of the first, I think, 70 of the webinars like this one that we had conducted as at that time. And the insights that our team and others who were not members of the committee, but were kind enough to contribute to our deliberations, believed were, invitations to war with China, because they were not robust, they were not demonstrating a determination, as I think you said, Brian, to wage war against China if, God forbid, it came to that. And as a result, over time, the individuals that were in that room in the Pentagon back in 1983, and not all, but some of their successors, I think have had an outsized influence on keeping the military impressive as it has been in terms of the war fighting that it has done in the aftermath, particularly of 9/11, at the tactical level. Impressive as the technology that has been brought to bear in many instances is, we still find ourselves, I fear, dramatically removed from the peace through strength posture that one would hope every military officer defaults to reflexively, and that with their leadership, with their active urging for the kinds of investments that are so manifestly needed, the public would respond, their representatives would respond. And I say this fully knowing that, somebody will point out that Pete Hegseth is manfully trying to do something about this. He's asked for $1.5 trillion for defense spending. Well, that's, I suspect, if properly spent, going to make a difference, but quite possibly not soon enough, especially if some of the factors that we've just been talking about, this sense that our destruction, our defeat at least, is inevitable, that has now been, I fear, communicated by captured elites, whether they're on Wall Street or the tech sector or the educational sector or the journalistic sector or the business sector more generally, or the military. We find ourselves in a really desperate pass. And what makes so important, I think, the recommendations of our book, which was the first, I'm proud to say, of the War Room series that our friend Steve Bannon has created, the various webinars that we've done, the recommendations that we've been advancing since our founding, and more generally, the combined efforts that each of us have been making to try to individually and in our various platforms raise awareness about the danger we face from China and its determination, both through traditional military capabilities, including a massive buildup of nuclear and non-nuclear forces, its partnership with other enemies to compound the disparities between our capabilities, and not least the extent to which we have told ourselves that there's nothing to see here, folks. All is well. We've got this under control. All can combine to put us in an actual shooting war if we're not careful. So the recommendations for taking action here are very serious and much in need, I believe, and I look forward, Brian, to just a quick back and forth with you about some aspects of this. I did want to specifically talk about something that Captain Fennell and I think Grant spoke to as well, and that is this practice of threat deflation. I mean, it's one thing to, sort of be governed by kind of arms control treaties and those sorts of things, but to be actively sort of diminishing and telling, among others, the president, perhaps, that the threat is not as it really is, and therefore we don't need to be taking corrective actions. Talk a little bit about how serious a problem that is as you see it, Brian.
Well, look, I think threat deflation has been the thing you and I have been combating most of our adult lives in this business.
Sure.
I mean, it was the threat deflation from the Soviet Union, then it was the threat deflation of Islamic terrorism. Now it's the threat deflation of communist China. That we have such a powerful military that they're never going to be able to do certain things to us. And of course, the president has to walk a relatively fine line about talking about how powerful we are genuinely militarily in order to deter an enemy, and then also explaining to the American people the kind of sacrifices that may be necessary in order to continue to have that kind of a military, or a better one that may be necessary to deter your enemy. When you see communist China doing what they're doing today, you simply have to do, rational calculations about whether we have enough offensive forces to deter them from invading the United States, whether we have enough forces to be able to put them in a position where they think it is simply a bad idea to go interfering with American interests abroad, or that we would even think about going after the United States. And without taking us, far afield here, the fact that we have not rounded up the 200,000 Chinese men of military age who came during the Biden administration into the United States, Chinese men of military age who appear to be military themselves, who are now living in the United States, operating in whatever way they think are useful here to present a long-term strategic threat to the country. The fact that we haven't done that is a byproduct of the threat deflation. That once you have enough elite people, either on Wall Street or within the military, the way Natalie did in her expose, or within the media, which she's highlighted, once you have enough threat deflation that we're never going to go to war with communist China, all of a sudden you take certain steps to make sure that, in fact, you don't spend the money on those particular resources, that you don't root out those 200,000 Chinese men, that you don't create a counterintelligence operation within the United States to make sure that that $20 billion that the CCP spends is not being spent in order to corrupt us as a nation, either politically, economically, or in any other way. This threat deflation piece is probably the most important. And as I think I was suggesting, and maybe you're implying, so much of the threat deflation is an intellectual failure on the part of our elites to see what is right before their eyes, which is that communist China, as Grant Newsham said, they're telling us what they're doing. They're writing about it in their own publications. They're telling us they would like to be the masters of the world. They're spending money and resources and diverting attention from their economy in order to build a military that is capable of ruling the planet. We can sit by and we can watch that happen, or we can do something about it. If we sit by and do nothing, either war will come and we will lose, or we will put ourselves in a position where we'll have to surrender to communist China because we don't have the military to fight them. Now, to do the latter is a horrible position for the country to ever be in. To knowingly allow it to happen is treason. We on the committee here, we've been articulating this over and over again because an insufficient number of our countrymen know this. Our elected representatives do not understand this, or they are willfully blind to the problem. And until we wake up, we are in an inferior position to the communist Chinese because they know what they're doing. And we as a country today do not.
Brian, it's such an incredibly important point, and as was your observation about an invasion by the Chinese. I suspect many, even among our audience listening to that, would have said, he's off on it too. But your subsequent point, and I must tell you, it's been absolutely maddening to me that there's been, as far as I can tell, no discussion by the administration. And this is about the best administration I've seen, certainly since the one I served in with Reagan. So I'm saying this with care, but the fact that we're not hearing from the administration that it is even aware of the problem that we may have as many as 200,000 Chinese soldiers who, by the way, Brian, just to your description, who not only are military age and bearing and seemingly, kitted up in a uniform way, if not literally in uniform. It suggests that they were operating in units or coming across in teams. But they were also unaccompanied, which is another indication that we're dealing with possibly special forces or certainly military personnel. And it's incumbent upon us, it seems to me, at the minimum, to be having that conversation, if only because we need the American people's eyes and ears and other senses brought to bear to try to figure out, where are these guys? What are they doing? We hear endlessly about see something, say something. If you don't know what you're looking for, or even what you're looking at, you probably are not going to be able to judge that that's something you need to say something about. So, Brian, I guess one other thought about all of this is another place where the shortfall is obviously acute and that needs to be addressed. And a week ago, we memorialized a man who was all about this, said it practically every conversation I ever had with him. The late Charles Sam Faddis would talk about the desperate shortfall of counterintelligence capabilities in this country. And it bears on much of what we've talked about. I have the feeling if it were a real priority for our country, those general officers would not ever have been in the position they got themselves into. It wouldn't have been contemplated because it would have been understood to be an unacceptable threat to our country. And similarly, the fact that we can't tell where 200,000 Chinese soldiers may be, the fact that we have so little clarity about that other piece of the problem that, as you know, Brian, I'm very concerned about, the Sharia supremacists who also came across the border in huge numbers. And I don't think we've got much of a clue about where people who are almost certainly here for jihad have wound up either. So having a capability that makes clear, first of all, we don't think we're in decline. We're not going to conduct ourselves as though we are. In fact, what we're going to do is redouble our efforts to ensure that we're not. And yes, that requires some budgetary expenditures and some process changes, but not least, we have to reprioritize the idea that we are going to protect this country from enemies within, not just foreign. And that's where, a much, much more robust and highly prioritized counterintelligence capability would play an important part, I think. Your thoughts, sir?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right, Frank. I mean, we've heard how many times from our friends in the FBI, when I say friends, people we know personally, on just how difficult it is to engage in counterintelligence with communist China, that there are just so many people operating in the country that they don't have the manpower to be able to follow all of them. They get one or two here and there that are stealing, this or that piece of intellectual property, or that they've done something to compromise, some person within some industry. And you sort of hear about it now and then, but overall, they haven't constructed a counterintelligence system to deal with all of these things. And I think, that by itself is a huge problem for us to deal with. My own thought about these generals, and by the way, I think folks like Jack Keane, by and large, Jack Keane is a fine American who's done great things. Our objection to Jack Keane going to China is probably not what he would say while he was over there, because I don't believe Jack Keane, for instance, would do anything to betray his country. What I do object to is the appearance of Jack Keane going to communist China and having closed-door sessions with military and intelligence officials within communist China. That the appearance of that is just wrong in so many ways. If the Chinese want to come to the United States and have a public conference with those very same generals and discuss openly before the American public their views about U.S.-China relations, go right ahead. I would welcome that kind of exposition of their ideas and the ideas of our retired generals, open in public for all to see. We are a free and open society here. Our ideas can bear the scrutiny of public disclosure. When you take men like these generals and flag officers who have access to the most sensitive intelligence available to a human being in the United States, however siloed each individual branch of the military may be, they know things that no one else does. They have security clearances at the very highest levels for a reason. To have them be paid and feted around communist China is an embarrassment to the United States, to its military, and to its people.
I think it goes even a step further, Brian, and it's been touched on, I think, previously, but to put a fine point on it, I mentioned Sam Faddis. One of the things we talked about last week was I was impressed beyond words by the fact that he was willing to describe the then sitting president of the United States in terms of his trade, that would be intelligence. He was an undercover operative for the CIA for the better part of 20 years, as a controlled asset of the Chinese Communist Party. And what I always thought when he said that was, my God, what do other people in the chain of command, other people in uniform, yes, under the people on the civilian side of the Defense Department, as it was called at the time, make of that? And my guess is, as would probably be true of this this initiative of China, that people who would never otherwise, especially if we had a counterintelligence capability worth a damn, never think about, having their own private conversations with the Chinese, let alone put themselves in compromising positions, might think, well, if the president is doing it, why shouldn't I? All of which is to simply say, we do our level best here at the Committee on the Present Danger of China, and I thank you, Brian, for setting the standard for this, to be just as clear-eyed as we can be about what is actually taking place. Chronicling it, yes. Warning about it, yes. But also trying to recommend practical things that can be done about it. And I would just say, coming out of this, one is return to the principle of peace through strength. And that strength has to be manifested not just in certain exotic capabilities and technologies, but across the board, a robustness that I think the president believes we enjoy and certainly knows we need. But I'm not sure he's being quite as candidly briefed about the actual state of affairs as should be the case. And this falls to, again, those military officers, those still serving, to be honest, to be, robust, most especially, as well as supportive of the peace through strength agenda, with practical capabilities being brought to bear as best we can. I would also just say that I think another place where corrective action is needed, as we talked about in this book, The Indictment, is holding accountable the people who are, whether they're in uniform or formerly were, or they're civilians, whatever their background. If they are aiding and abetting our enemies, they need, at a minimum, to be prosecuted in the court of public opinion, as Natalie Winters has just done, to expose what they have been doing and to encourage accountability wherever we can do it. Only that way can we deter, I'm afraid, much, much worse behavior and more harm in the face of this real and growing threat from the Chinese Communist Party. So with those words as sort of admonitions about what needs to be done, as well as depicting why, let's bring this program to a close with heartfelt thanks to each of the contributors, Natalie Winters, through her War Room appearance, Captain James Fennell, Colonel Grant Newsham, and our Chairman Brian Kennedy. All of you are rendering incredibly important service, as I think is the committee more generally, and I'm proud to be part of it, and hope that all of our listeners will take full advantage of the content at presentdangerchina.org and share it widely, because we need the help as well as the support of the American people. God bless you all. God bless America. Over and out.